Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice, smaller 7-game Major League Baseball slate today. Yesterday's slate was just wild. It was one of the most strangest slates for daily fantasy sports we've had in a while. That said, we should have a much more chill slate today. Hopefully, we won't have too many issues when it comes to weather like we did yesterday. Looking at the weather now, though, we do have a couple. The Colorado game definitely has some potential for delays. And let's see here, is there anything else? It doesn't look like there's anything else here. So it looks like just that game. With that said, I think everything plays today, so I don't think we're going to have too much risk there. Any rate, let's go ahead and get started on the slate, though. So we do have a very interesting pitching slate, as we have 4 pitchers that look really solid, and then we have a bunch of guys that can be kind of contrarian. So let's go ahead and start with the core plays potential. Screwball being the top overall play for Detroit against Seattle. He's got the best strikeout rate and the lowest total, or at least he's tied for that. On the slate, he's got really good opportunity here to have a solid game. He doesn't always get the win, which is somewhat because of the team he's on, but and this game could be a kind of tight game with 2 good pitchers in it. But that said, he still has that 25 fantasy point upside, and he's got a really good strikeout rate for this slate and this team. So I think he's in a really solid spot to be the top overall play. Others to consider: Chris Sale for Atlanta. He does have a tough match with Milwaukee. His strikeout rate is really good. However, I am a little concerned as he pitched against Milwaukee the last time out. He also didn't get as many strikeouts as we would want in that game. And of course, he didn't pick up the win either, despite pitching a decent game. And he only scored 15 fantasy points. He's been good all season long, but that is his floor about. And so he can definitely get that. But for his price point, it's definitely not ideal to get a 15 or 16 fantasy point game out of him. But he's still a really solid, interesting play on the slate. Looking at Taj Bradley for the Tampa Bay Rays, he's got a favorable matchup with St. Louis. Now, he hasn't been as good at home, or sorry, on the road as he has been at home, but he does have really good ceiling here, and he's going to be low owned, so he's going to be a nice contrarian play. He does project well with a decent strikeout rate, not as high as the top 2 guys, but he's a good option away from them, and he definitely has some nice potential today. George Kirby for Seattle has a favorable matchup against Detroit. Again, this is going to be a tough pitching duel for these two for this game, but I do think both of them have a lot of potential. He also, the really big issue with Kirby is that he's a little bit more limited in the strikeout upside here, as he does have tendency to have bad strikeout games more often. Though I do think this is going to be a low-scoring pitching duel, so you can definitely use one or both of these pitchers. But he's definitely the riskier one because of the strikeout being considerably lower. He projects 2 strikeouts lower than Scuball, so to keep that in mind. And I do like strikeouts as an important metric for choosing pitchers. So let's go ahead and look at the other options. There are extreme GPP plays. Cole Reagans for Kansas City. He has some potential today. His strikeout rate's good enough, but the matchup against Boston is not ideal, and Boston does project decently well today. Peralta also looks decent for Milwaukee as a kind of an extreme GPP play. He has got a high ceiling for strikeouts. The issue is that sometimes Atlanta can be good and just bomb home runs, and so he's a little bit risky for that. Looking at Cutter Crawford for Boston, he's got a difficult match against Kansas City, and the strikeout rate is probably a little too low for our consideration for a normal play, but he does have some upside as he does have some potential here. Fetty for St. Louis, also an extreme GPP play, as he has a pretty good opportunity to limit the runs in this game, but his strikeout rate is rather low. Our one Hail Mary play will be Paul Blackburn for the Mets. I do like some Colorado bats, though, but he has shown that he can have good ceiling games occasionally where he scores 20 fantasy points. And Colorado, while they do have a couple guys that can hit a home run today, they also have a lot of guys that can strike out. And while he doesn't have a high strikeout rate, he's definitely somebody to consider as a Hail Mary play, a high risk, high reward type situation. Let's go ahead and look at our bats now. So let's look at our catchers. So looking at the bat, Francisco Alvarez, where'd it go? Sorry, for the Mets does have the most upside on the slate. He is playing in Colorado, which gives him a boost. Now, he didn't do much. He didn't start yesterday, so hopefully he can get back in the starting lineup today, and maybe he'll be refreshed for this game. I don't think Torrens will start again. So we'll have to wait and see for sure. But he does look like a solid play, and he has home run upside today as the home run metric is really good. JT Realmuto is probably the top other alternative if you don't want to use the Mets. His metrics are not all that super today, but he's projecting well and has a pretty decent matchup against the Dodgers pitching Stone, which has not done very well this year. Looking at Elias Diaz for Colorado, he's kind of a contrarian play and a cheap play. Uh, he does have some good metrics today, but not great. I think he's a solid play though in this game, as he does have good a couple hitting potential opportunities here. William Contreras, Alejandro Kirk, and Gary Sanchez also have upside, but they are definitely high risk, high reward options. Kirk will be a high owned play along with Sean Murphy and Gary Sanchez. The low owned upside guy will be Francisco Alvarez, because I think some people will be a little bit scared of the Mets, considering the fact they only scored 3 runs yesterday against up in Colorado. So looking at first base, though, Pete Alonso does look really solid today. He's got really good hitting metrics and home run metrics today. He didn't hit anything yesterday, really. He had 1 hit, had a walk, and 2 strikeouts, scored 7 fantasy points. Wasn't enough, but he does look really solid again today, and he has really good metrics, so I think he's somebody you have to consider. Ohtani also looks solid. He's been absolutely on the tear lately, as he has all season long, hitting the ball. Now, he didn't do much yesterday, but he should be able to bounce back today. His hitting metric and home run metric are the best on the slate from both perspectives, so I think he is somebody you have to consider on the slate. Alternative options: JD Martinez, Vlade Jr., Bryce Harper, Freddie Freeman, Matt Olson, and Rice Hoskins. But Hoskins has a tough matchup against uh, Chris Sale, so keep that in mind. The ownership here: JD Martinez, Pete Alonso, Ryan Mountcastle, and then low-owned upside guys, Bryce Harper and Ohtani. It's going to be hard to find value at first base, but there's plenty of value at other positions, which helps. Looking at second base, we're going to find one of those values. That is Davis Schneider. Now, he can play in the outfield as well. He's just $2,800, and his metrics today are absolutely off the charts. I was a little surprised to see them so well, but I'm not going to complain too much. He looks like a really solid play, so he's somebody I'm definitely going to try to roster some today. Another guy, though, at this position that's also nicely priced is Jeff McNeil for the Mets, as he also has really good hitting metrics today. He hasn't got the super home run upside today, but he hadn't played yesterday, but he should be able to be a solid option here in this matchup here against Colorado. Looking at the ownership here: Davis Schneider, Brendan Rodgers, Jeff McNeil, Michael Massey, and Chris Morel. Low-owned upside guys: Brandon Lowe, Andrew Montecero. Milwaukee does project decently well, despite they have a tough matchup, which does concern me about using Chris Sale, so to keep that in mind. But second base, definitely a position you can find some value and go a little bit cheap on. Looking at third base, Ryan McMahon does jump off the tip page as a really solid play for Colorado. He's got good hitting metrics today. He's definitely worth a potential play here. Now, he didn't do anything yesterday, but I do think he has some good good contrarian or good upside on this slate. Mark Vientos for the Mets. His metrics are not nearly as good today as they were yesterday. He didn't end up getting a hit yesterday, which was disappointing, but he does have potential, as he is in a favorable matchup in a situation that he can definitely do well. Ernie Clement for Toronto, also very interesting today as kind of a contrarian Hail Mary play that's cheap, as he's just been really good lately, and so he definitely has some potential here as a cheap kind of a punt play. Kobe Mayo also fits that punt play for Baltimore. He hasn't yet gotten a hit in his first 4 games, but if he starts today, he'll be somebody to consider. As he at some point he's going to get going, as he does have good. He is one of the top prospects in baseball, so he's got home run potential too. He just hasn't gotten started very well so far. But ownership here: Kobe Mayo, Clement, Ryan McMahon, Ventos, Chris Morel, and Kiki Hernandez. Low-owned upside guys: Jose Caballero, Austin Riley, and Montecero again. This position, you can go a lot of different ways, but I think going cheap or going with McMahon or Ventos is probably the best strategy. Looking at shortstop, kind of a expensive position today, with Lindor, Witt Jr., and Gunnar Henderson all just looking phenomenal, all with good hitting metrics and home run metrics today. They all look really solid. Now, Tovar for Colorado is kind of a contrarian play. that has some home run potential today, but he's high risk, high reward. And then 2 value plays, Clement, who I already mentioned, and Leo Jimenez for Toronto. Now, he's a very interesting play because he's dirt cheap. And while he has played in some games, he hasn't had a ton of really good games. He doesn't need a ton of fantasy points to pay off here. And so he's definitely a dirt cheap play that can help you pay up other positions. Looking at the ownership, Lindor, Ezekiel Tovar, Clement, and Leo Jimenez will be tops with the ownership. Low-owned upside guys, Gunnar Henderson, Jose Caballero, and Trey Turner. Looking at outfielders, excuse me, I say this position is probably one of the weakest outfielders I've seen in a while. Ohtani obviously jumps off the page as a really solid play. As I already talked about, Brandon Nimmo does look good for the Mets. He's got really good hitting metrics today. Not sure a home run is coming, but I do think he's got good hitting upside today, so he's definitely worth a look from that perspective. He has kind of struggled lately, but he did get a couple good hits yesterday. He does need to score more than what he's doing because his prices come up for this matchup, though. Looking at Kyle Schwarber for Philly, he's got a favorable matchup here. He's got hitting and home run metrics that are really solid today, so he's definitely somebody I'm going to consider a lot, though he's fairly expensive. But if you wanted to pay up for somebody, he's definitely a good option if you can't afford Ohtani. Looking at some value options, Jesse Winker looks like he's got really solid metrics for this game. I was a little surprised that he really popped up here as he hasn't done a ton lately, but he does have random situations where he does good games. And this game being in Colorado actually does give him a boost as well, though his price is not ideal. Davis Schneider, uh, who can play at second base, can also play in the outfield. So can't so much for blah blah blah. Sorry, so much so I can say that for Jeff McNeil as well. What did I just say? I don't know. Anyhow, so David Schneider and Jeff McNeil can also both play in the outfield as well as second base, so you can definitely mix and match them there. Harrison Bader for the Mets, also an interesting play today. Kind of a contrarian cheap play as well. Like, getting some guys from the Mets against Colorado, definitely a strategy today, and he definitely looks okay. As for contrarian plays, JD Martinez, Marcell Ozuna, George Springer, Britton Doyle, Charlie Blackmon, Jake Cave, Tyler O'Neill, Chris Bryant, and Randy Arzonia are the contrarian options at this position. Looking at the ownership, Schneider, JD Martinez, Brandon Nimmo, Jesse Winker, and Jeff McNeil, and then Loper Fido, Chris Bryant, Colton Cowser, Anthony Santander, who I kind of just have a feeling about getting a home run today, and Charlie Blackmon have good ownership. The low-owned upside guys, Harrison Bader, Kyle Schwarber, Josh Lowe, Brandon Marsh, Jose Siri, Cedric Mullins, Austin Hayes, George Springer, and Ohtani. My top, I think David Schneider is probably the safest play because he's just got a lot of potential today. But I do like Anthony Santander as kind of a home run play as well. So to keep that in mind, guys. With that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing.